All right, how is everyone doing? I am Rich CELENZA. Thanks for tuning in to the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? So what I want to get into today is actually a spin-off off another podcast I did. I did a podcast recently. I haven't posted it, but I will be probably before this one. Makes sense, right? And just in case, I got to iron my clothes real quick here, so if the audio isn't perfect, I'm sorry. I just try to knock this stuff out as quickly as I can, whenever I can. But, so if the cord moves around a little bit, I'm sorry about that. But, yeah, so I did a podcast with my girlfriend, Rhea, regarding kind of having two identities growing up. So she was a Navy brat, and she was born in Florida. She's a native Floridian. And then she ended up living in L.A., and her accent, you know, sometimes, it's kind of funny. It goes from not lazy like a southern draw by any means. It's not that at all. But it's kind of funny how she'll have like no accent and then kind of a Valley Girl accent because she was there throughout her teens. So that's kind of funny. And then I sometimes wondered with me living in Chicago and then coming to Florida so often. And then I even ended up in San Diego for, 5-6 years. But I travel so much, people sometimes get confused with my accent as well. People usually think I'm from Boston, except people from Boston. I usually get New York the most. But that was kind of more identity-driven, saying, well, I'm half Chicago, kind of half Florida. People from Florida kind of look at me as a Chicago guy. People at Chicago kind of started to look at me as a Florida guy. And I went through that when I was younger, too, because I was in Chicago so often. And we lived in the suburbs as well, so the Chicago guys would call me a preppy suburb kid, and then the suburb kids would call me a Chicago guy. Very weird. But in this case, I was thinking identity, because in my Mastering Self-Confidence program, I try to help men find the woman or women of their dreams. And I also try to help men find the identity they're most comfortable with, because I think a lot of times we're programmed to be a certain way from our parents or from whatever environment we grew up in, and then we want to change our identity a little bit. And it's very hard because we're afraid people are going to look at us differently, and we really value our identity. We don't want to just let it go. So, but here's the thing regarding identity. If you want to make certain changes in your life, you're going to have to change your identity to a certain degree. Even if you want to change jobs, that's changing your identity. Change the way you look to a certain degree, that's a different, you're changing your identity. It could be a hairstyle, it could be the way you dress, all these different things. So actually, sometimes change is great. I think change is great because you need to evolve into what you feel the most comfortable, because a lot of people suppress that. But in this case, I've been going kind of back and forth with my mom a little, and it came up again with my cousin. We were talking about podcasts, and he said, Rich, as far as my cousin said, I never knew all this about you when we were younger, like your dad owned a nightclub and your other side of the family. I only knew you from our side of the family. And I said, yeah, most people, when you sometimes think in life of someone, right, you only know that person through how you know them, right? That's kind of obvious. But say a family environment, a lot of people have two sides of the family. So father, mother, and usually, unless it's a birthday party where everybody kind of comes together, you're usually spending time between both sides of the family a lot of times. They're not always all together, not all the time. That's what happened with me. So one side of my family lived in, for the most part, Cicero. I was with my Italian immigrant grandparents on that side. And then, that was a different lifestyle, even from, wealth standpoint. And then my father's family was more on the wealthier side. So when I was with them, we had a summer home, they had boats, they had Cadillacs, they had condominiums and things in Fort Lauderdale, Boca, Pompano. It was just an entirely different lifestyle. So I had both kind of going, which was wonderful, and I learned so much because that's just the way it was. I used to call my family the Italian Kennedys. Kind of ridiculous, but it was very interesting because it was just two. And what was interesting is both sides were basically 100% Italian. Both just had two totally different environments. And I love both sides. My mother's side, rough and tougher, kind of Italians from Naples, Napolitan, and they're very, I guess I fall probably more under their category. Even though like my father's side, I may look like them. And I do love fashion and things because they were all involved with the fashion garment industry. I would definitely put me more under the category of being Napolitan than I would. They're from Vasto. So the aggression, the anger sometimes, and just that, I guess, attitude. I would definitely say I'm more Nabali Don than I am anything else, hands down. Because even compared to my other cousins, we all have it. My father's side, they're all wonderful. I can't even explain how wonderful they are. Everything, their personalities, hilarious, everything. And I'm not going to say I'm the black sheep of that family, but I would probably put myself in that category. But back to the identity, it was very interesting because my mother now bringing her back into play. She's like, I never knew this about you, and I don't know that about you. Because when you do something like this, a podcast or videos, they really start to see who you are besides what they know. And it's funny, my mother, who knows me the most, I've lived in Florida since I was basically 18 for that spurt, like I said, that I lived in San Diego. But my mother, I never really swore in front of my mother or any of that. And I remember when I made my first movie, Sore Losers, that's about the underground world of gambling in Chicago, and I never used to talk about that stuff with my mom, the way we gambled and our lifestyle. Who would? You know, you were kind of programmed, you don't want to do that in front of your mom. But that's really who I was, a lot of that. And now that I'm talking on the podcast, I think sometimes she may be shocked, maybe not. And she's always like, you talk about your dad too much, you talk about this too much. I'm like, I'm just trying to be honest and genuine. But it did hit me that, you know, what identity do I have I should say what I did, like my identity, I realize changes within whatever environment I'm in. And I think a lot of people kind of understand that because, you know, like when you're around your parents, of course, you're not going to be like you're around your friends or your cousins. Or sometimes I have an identity at work this way. And then when I'm around somewhere else, I'm this way. Am I performing? I always say life is a performance. But truly, who am I? Like, is there a balance there of who I really am? And I think I'm finally starting to get it through this podcast and videos where people are like, oh, this is exactly who Rich is, if they were interested in knowing about me. And it's kind of a no bullshit thing, but it took me a long time to get there because I'm not saying I'm a phony, but when I was with my father in the nightclub business or in the vending business, my father used to call me, they'd say, send in the ape. So if we had problems, I almost liked problems, but I was very aggressive. I wanted to get, whatever we had to get done, I had to get done. That would be collecting money. That would be moving equipment. Would become any issue we had. But then, of course, when I'm with my mother doesn't know that side of me or disposition. My mother's more like, hey, let's go to an Italian restaurant. Let's go to Mass. Let's go shopping. Let's kind of do these type of things. Even though I think my mother knew that I just never wanted to act so rough and tough around my mom, but I really do have a lot of times a real bad attitude. I didn't want to, and I'm sure my mother understands that about me, that I'm a little that way, but not as much as I think she really knew. But again, I think the reason I'm putting this podcast up is kind of figuring, if you think about how do you actually behave, or like, who are you really when it comes down to it? What identity are you? Am I the one that I'm with my mom? Am I the one with my dad? Am I the one when I'm with my uncles and my cousins in Italy? Am I that guy? Or I'm just with my girlfriend traveling? Am I that guy? And again, I understand we all have different moods. We all have different things. We all change too and evolve. Good and bad. In relationships with everyone. But I was really lately trying to figure out, and I talked about this, I spent so much time alone that I kind of started to figure out who I was. It took me 6-7 years. What I'm comfortable saying, doing, and who I was. And not just always performing. And that's something that I wanted to get in on this podcast is, do you really know who you are and where you stand? Because I think a lot of people don't. I think they sometimes think they're also, like, people aren't looking at them a certain way, or they're being perceived a certain way when you're really not. And I understand a lot of people behind closed doors. Everybody has their own ways of doing things, and if you think that everybody is how you know them, I can assure you're most likely mistaken, because a lot of people you think are one way are actually not that way, and you got to just understand that. And that doesn't mean that they're bad or that they're real good. It just means you only know them for who they are towards you. And that is something else that I had to really learn, is, like trust, especially in a relationship or whatever, and friendships. And it could be with your relatives. It could be with whoever you're with or that you know, sometimes you really got to pay attention, because I think a lot of times people are taken advantage of. And I think sometimes even us as humans, we do things to manipulate others as well, to kind of get what we want. And I don't know if manipulation is good or bad, right? Some people are great at doing it. I don't have the component, I think, to manipulate too much anymore. I'm too abrupt or too abrasive, and I just say it the way it is, which was interesting because when I was talking to my girlfriend recently, I thought I was actually kind of usually very casually calm and not really, but she's like, you're very sharp and harsh at times. And she's like, I don't think you mean it to be hurtful. I think you actually do it to be helpful, but it's the way you say it. And I understand that because my father and my grandfather from Italy, I think, actually I got that from my grandfather, I think, Grandpa Joe. No, Joe, he was no bullshit. And I love that part of it, right? I mean, it was just so cut and dry. He would just, if he had a problem with you, he'd address you immediately, or he wants this done, he just wants it done. I love that. But I think sometimes that can come off offensive. And sometimes I'm offensive. And we discussed that, me and my father, a lot of times. He's like, why don't, he'd even say, I come off more offensive than you. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Because around my dad, I'm not going to be that offensive. But little does he know, when I'm not around him, I'm probably much more offensive. But he doesn't know that because I'm not going to do that to him. And what's interesting with parents too, sometimes we get in arguments with them and stuff. But I usually will back down to my parents. And I the last thing I want to do is upset my parents. Who wants to do that? But if they weren't my parents don't really, my father may know it because he worked with me for so many years, but my mother doesn't know when I turn in. She'll always be like, calm down, settle down. She never seen me really get nuts because I'm always kind of like want to make sure she never saw me that way because I think I'd be embarrassed. Hopefully, I don't think my parents ever saw me drunk. I never really did drugs, any of that shit. So I think my identity with them has always been, they don't have those goofy memories like Rich did this to me or he did that or he came home smashed or was always doing this. Any issue I ever had, even with police or whatever I had in my past, I always independently took on because I was kind of embarrassed. Even though a lot of people would want attention from that and saying, oh yeah, this happened to me and that, I got in this jam or this happened and I did, they want their parents to see that. I didn't want my parents to see that. I just wanted them to be comfortable around me a lot of times. And I can't say my father was always comfortable around me, but that was the industry we were in. We're more like brothers. But regarding me and my mother, and my mother's very young, so me and my mother at times, people even thought we were brother-sister when we were together a lot of times, or then we were a couple, which is hilarious because I was an only child, and then my mother was divorced. But yeah, I kind of want to just express that, like if you sometimes ever think about it, think about how your identity is, in your life with all different types of people. And what I'm trying to do is, like I said, just kind of balance it out. And it's not saying that anybody's a phony. I'm not saying that at all. But I realize a lot of times if I'm with this type of person, I'm always clowning around because they're kind of a clown in this and that, like I explained earlier. And I kind of just want to bring it all together where no matter who I'm with and no matter what I'm doing, I'm kind of the same person. I don't want to perform. And that doesn't mean I do swear. I don't want to still swear in front of my mom. I'm not saying all of a sudden I got to be that guy. But I do want my mother to see who I am from top to bottom, especially as she's getting older because our parents ain't going to be with us forever. And I think as kids, we're kind of programmed to be like, hide a lot of stuff from your parents, right? At least the environment I was in. Hide. Don't show them this. Don't tell them this. Don't be this. I'm not saying you got to tell your parents everything or whoever your friends are, your colleagues or anything. But I do just want to get a balance in my life to say, hey, Rich was this way. And I think it would just bring a lot of ease to a lot of us, especially if we're in relationships, because I see guys who they act a certain way in front of their wife, and then they're quite the opposite when they're traveling, or they're this way in front of their family members, and then again, quite the opposite when they're in this other environment, which again, I'm not saying is bad, but I sometimes even wonder, like, who really are you? Again, it's none of my business really who they are, but I think sometimes people are even confused on who they are. So, and again, that's not bad. I'm not saying any of this is bad. It was just something that I thought about that I just wanted to kind of address regarding just getting a balance on even the emotions, because I think sometimes when we're behaving differently in front of all different people,
it could be bad, because even some people can bring out the worst in us. So sometimes when I do get around certain people that aggravate me, I'm pissed off, or I'm already huffy-puffy, when I should just be like, either stay away from this person or just be yourself. Don't let them control my emotions. Because I think that's also something that happens when our identities are changing a little bit, depending on who we're with, is our emotions. And some could be good, like you're with your cousins that you love being with, and all you do is laugh. And then you may be with a colleague at work or a couple colleagues, and all they do are making you pissed off. Try to get balance there, is what I should say. So I'm going to wrap it up there. If you get a chance, you can check out my YouTube channel. I'm always posting things regarding my Mastering Self-Confidence program, which is to help men find the woman or women of their dreams. I also get into fashion, fitness, hygiene, and grooming as well. And I'm not going to get into subjects like this necessarily, but I definitely have like 45 hours of material on there to help men with their identity. It's not strictly about their identity, but I'm saying I do have different sections in there regarding truly finding out who you are and what you want to be to make yourself happy and others around you even. Yeah, I have that. And I got this podcast. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. So if you want to check me out there as well. And please leave a comment, share, call me. If you disagree with me, I get it. I love it all. So believe me, I just like communicating with people and helping people, or at least trying to maybe bring up subjects that make people think about who they are. All right? I'm going to leave it there. All right, take care, and if you're traveling, safe travels.